My biggest mistake was believing my family understood even the most basic boundaries of decency. I used to think that if you just talk things out, people would naturally grasp right and wrong. But when my little sister shoved my 7 months pregnant wife down the stairs and smirked, it was just a prank, I learned a colder truth. Some people treat others' pain as a stage to perform their ego. And sometimes the real tragedy isn't the fall. It's the person standing at the top saying, "Relax, it's not a big deal." My name is Evan Carter. I'm 32, living with my wife, Lydia, in a modest 2-story home on the outskirts of Portland, Maine, the kind of neighborhood where the winter air always carries a hint of pine, and people wave from their porches without prying into your life. We don't have anything extravagant, but what we do have is peace. Or at least, we used to. Lydia was 7 months pregnant, moving slower with each passing week, but every time she rested her hands on her belly, her whole face softened in a way that made everything else feel small. We'd spent the last month preparing the nursery, assembled a birchwood crib I bought from a local shop, and Lydia picked out pastel cloud-patterned wallpaper she fell in love with. These tiny decisions felt like stepping stones toward our future. It was supposed to be a calm, precious time, but my family, especially my younger sister, has never allowed calm to exist anywhere near them. My parents, Richard and Margaret, care more about maintaining a flawless family image than acknowledging anyone's actual feelings. But the real source of chaos is my sister Chloe. She's 24, but emotionally, she's a teenager who's never outgrown the belief that consequences are for other people. For as long as I can remember, my parents have excused her behavior with lines like, "She's just impulsive," or "That's her personality." Every disrespectful comment, every dramatic scene, every selfish outburst, all waved away by the adults who should have taught her better. That's how you create a person who thinks the world is obligated to entertain them. That weekend, Lydia planned a small brunch to show my family the latest ultrasound photos. She'd woken up early to make waffles, cut fruit, and set the table with a ceramic set she'd been saving for special days. My parents arrived on time. Chloe didn't. She waltzed in nearly 40 minutes late, trailing an overpowering cloud of perfume and a face that looked like she had somewhere better to be. She dropped her purse onto our couch with a heavy thud, glanced around and said, "Huh, smaller than I expected." She didn't even try to hide her tone. Lydia, being Lydia, smiled and offered her a drink. My parents pretended not to hear the insult. I've spent a lifetime mastering the art of staying quiet around Chloe, so I kept my expression neutral. But I could feel the familiar tension settle in, that slight, buzzing anxiety that always surfaced whenever Chloe decided she wasn't the center of attention. After brunch, Lydia suggested we go upstairs so she could show them the nursery. The stairs aren't steep, but with her belly so big, she always took them slowly, one hand on the railing. I followed right behind her, just in case. My parents trailed behind me. Chloe walked up beside Lydia, arms crossed, wearing the bored, irritated face she put on whenever something wasn't about her. We stopped at the landing halfway up. Lydia turned slightly and pointed at the wallpaper we'd put up as a test. She looked radiant, proud, excited, glowing in that way expecting mothers sometimes do. And in the middle of that softness, that happiness, I saw something strange flicker across Chloe's face, a smirk. The kind she wore when she was about to ruin something simply because she could. She said, "Watch this." Before any of us could react, she extended her hand and shoved Lydia's shoulder, not hard enough to look violent, but with just enough force to knock someone off balance. And Lydia wasn't just someone. She was 7 months pregnant. Her foot slipped. Her hand missed the railing. I saw her eyes widen with terror, and then her body toppled down the wooden steps. Each impact hit me like a punch. My father cursed. My mother shrieked. But all I heard was the sickening sound of Lydia's body meeting wood, followed by a sharp, pained gasp as she reached the bottom. Chloe stood frozen, but not in horror and disbelief that her prank had actual consequences. I raced down, heart slamming in my chest, and knelt beside my wife as she clutched her belly and tried to breathe through the pain. The world around me dimmed until all I could hear was her strained whisper of my name, and in that moment, staring at her trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, I felt something inside me shift, something that had been dormant for years. All the silence, all the tolerance, all the excuses I'd accepted for my family's behavior. It all ended the moment my wife lay broken at the bottom of our stairs. The paramedics arrived faster than I expected, but every second between Lydia's fall and their arrival felt stretched and distorted, like I was trapped inside a moment that refused to move forward. I held her hand the entire time they assessed her. She was conscious, but barely breathing in sharp, uneven gulps while her other arm guarded her stomach protectively. They loaded her onto the stretcher, and I climbed into the ambulance with them, my voice cracking as I answered their rapid-fire questions about her pregnancy. Inside the ambulance, the siren howled above us, but all I could hear was Lydia's trembling breath. A paramedic pressed a fetal Doppler to her abdomen, and for a terrifying moment, there was nothing, just static and the hum of the vehicle. Then faintly, a heartbeat, consistent, strong. I felt my knees go weak with relief, but the fear didn't leave. It clung to me like cold air. At the hospital, Lydia was rushed into an emergency ultrasound. I stood there uselessly, staring at the door as if I could will it to open faster. When the doctor finally emerged and told me the baby was okay, shaken but okay, the wave of relief that hit me nearly brought me to my knees. Lydia had bruising, they said, muscle trauma. She needed monitoring, rest, observation. They reassured me we were lucky. The word lucky tasted bitter. While Lydia slept in the dim hospital room, her hand wrapped around mine, my phone buzzed nonstop. I ignored it for as long as I could, but eventually answered out of sheer exhaustion. My father's voice came through, cold and clipped. Evan, don't escalate this. Chloe didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I stared at the linoleum floor, stunned by how quickly he brushed aside what had happened. My mother chimed in before I could respond. It was an accident. She was joking around. You know how Lydia gets, maybe she just lost her footing. Lost her footing. That's how they categorized my pregnant wife tumbling down a staircase. My vision narrowed. I ended the call mid-sentence. When I got home later to grab clothes and toiletries for Lydia, I found Chloe still there, standing in our living room, arms crossed like she owned the place. She didn't look scared or devastated or even guilty. She looked annoyed. Seriously? She scoffed. You're acting like I tried to kill her. I barely touched her. Something inside me went quiet. Not empty. Quiet. A silence that felt colder than anger. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't give her anything to twist or manipulate. I simply looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the person my parents had built. A girl who'd been taught that remorse was optional, accountability was negotiable, and pain was entertainment. Chloe shifted uncomfortably under my stare. Come on, Evan. Pregnant women fall all the time. She's fine. I turned and walked past her without a word. My silence hit her harder than shouting ever could, because for the first time in her life, the person she expected to placate her didn't. The next morning, I met with a lawyer named Mark Holloway. Tall, quiet, sharp-eyed. The kind of attorney who made you feel like he saw straight through the noise. I told him everything. The shove, the fall, the way Chloe tried to rewrite what happened, the phone call from my parents. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "This isn't a family misunderstanding. Your sister shoved a pregnant woman down a staircase. That's aggravated assault." Hearing him say it out loud was like the room clicked into focus. We filed a report, not because I wanted revenge, because Lydia deserved safety. Because my child deserved a father who didn't fold in the face of manipulation. Because Chloe had gotten away with everything her entire life and someone had finally paid the price for it, and it wasn't going to happen again. Later that day, the police contacted Chloe for her statement. My father called me immediately afterward, this time furious, accusing me of destroying the family and overreacting. My mother texted paragraphs about how we handle things internally, how outsiders don't need to know, how Chloe is too young to deal with legal trouble. But I'd stopped listening the moment Lydia's body hit the floor. I turned off my phone. When I returned to the hospital that evening, Lydia stirred awake. Her voice was soft but steady when she said, "I'm not afraid of Chloe. I'm afraid of you letting them keep doing this to us." Her words didn't cut. They clarified. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I won't." For the first time in years, I felt something close to conviction, the kind that didn't shake under pressure. Because I wasn't just protecting Lydia, I was finally protecting myself. 3 days after the police finalized our statements, the case was officially transferred to the district attorney's office, and Chloe was summoned to appear for questioning. I wasn't there during her interview, but my mother's panicked voicemail painted the entire scene with disturbing clarity. Chloe had broken down the moment the investigator used the phrase aggravated assault for someone who'd grown up believing consequences were optional. Hearing a felony charge spoken out loud must have hit her like cold water. My parents' calls came in waves, pleading, bargaining, guilt-tripping, but I ignored every single one. For the first time in my life, silence was the only language I could trust myself to speak. The DA moved quickly. They weren't charmed by tears, intimidated by last names, or softened by parental pleading. They looked at the facts. Chloe shoved a 7 months pregnant woman down a flight of stairs. There was no misunderstanding to reinterpret, no clumsy moment to sell. When the day of Chloe's preliminary hearing arrived, I went. Not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because after years of being her unwilling buffer against reality, I needed to see this moment without looking away. Chloe looked small, truly small, for the first time ever. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her jacket sleeves. When the prosecutor read through Lydia's medical report, detailing the bruising, the trauma, the fetal monitoring, Chloe flinched like each word struck her directly. There was no room for denial in that courtroom. No parents to interrupt. No narrative for her to twist. Just the truth, delivered cleanly and without sympathy. After the hearing, Chloe approached me outside in the cold parking lot. My parents hovered several feet away, unsure whether to run to her or stay back. Chloe stopped in front of me with her arms wrapped around herself, looking like a person stripped of every layer of bravado she'd ever relied on. "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered, not whining, not blaming, just saying something painfully honest. She swallowed hard before adding, "I'm sorry. I know I hurt her. I know I hurt you." Her eyes glistened, and for once they weren't searching for a reaction or an advantage. They were simply asking me to hear her. I held her gaze for a long, quiet moment before saying, "I don't hate you, but I'm not protecting you from this." Chloe nodded, slow, shaky, but genuine. No arguments, no excuses, no deflection, just acceptance, something she had never shown in her life. Behind her, my parents looked stunned, as if the world had just shifted into a shape they didn't recognize. But I turned away before they could speak. Whatever they felt was no longer my responsibility. I wasn't here to negotiate. I wasn't here to fix. I wasn't here to cushion Chloe's fall. For the first time, she would have to face the weight of what she'd done without me standing between her and the consequences she created. The district attorney ultimately settled on a non-custodial sentence, a year of probation, mandatory emotional regulation classes, community service, and a permanent mark on Chloe's record. Most people would call that lenient. For Chloe, it was the first time in her life she couldn't hide behind charm, tears, or our parents' frantic attempts to clean up her mistakes. According to my mother, who couldn't resist updating me even after I stopped responding, Chloe's hands shook so badly while signing her probation paperwork that the officer had to tell her to slow down. It was the kind of moment my family was never forced to witness before, Chloe facing consequences without anyone rushing in to shield her. She listened quietly as the terms were explained, her face pale, her eyes unfocused. Every sentence seemed to sink deeper into her, reshaping the person she had always believed herself to be. The weeks that followed changed her in ways even I hadn't expected. Chloe began her community service at a municipal cleanup program, wearing a light blue uniform shirt and thick work gloves, picking up trash in public parks and clearing debris from hiking trails. Nobody there cared who her parents were or what excuses she'd gotten away with before. She was just another person assigned a job and expected to finish it. My mother complained about it relentlessly. She shouldn't be doing this kind of work, but Chloe, according to the rare updates I allowed myself to hear, never argued with the assignments. She kept her head down. She worked. She learned, in the quietest, slowest way possible, what accountability felt like when stripped of theatrics. Standing outside that world, I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't take pleasure in imagining her discomfort. It wasn't about that. It was about the simple, clean fact that the universe had finally stopped bending itself around her impulses. And maybe, for the first time, she realized how fragile people are when others stop absorbing their impact. I ran into her again by accident one afternoon while taking Lydia to a follow-up appointment. Lydia, almost fully recovered, was feeling better, stronger, but I still found myself hyper-aware of every step she took. On the way back to the parking lot, I saw Chloe standing near the sidewalk, holding a stack of forms. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was tied back the way it had been at the hearing. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, as if she was still adjusting to the absence of all the invisible scaffolding that had held her up most of her life. When she noticed me, she froze for a moment, then walked over but stopped at a respectful distance. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said quietly, her voice steady but fragile. "I just wanted you to know, I'm trying, really trying." There was no dramatic pause, no hope of being rescued, no expectation that I would fix anything. For the first time since we were kids, she wasn't performing. She was just speaking. I nodded, not out of obligation, but because I believed her. "Changing isn't about me," I said. "It's between you and the person you want to become." She nodded back, eyes lowering for a moment, and then she turned to leave. No tears, no theatrics, no manipulation. Just a quiet acceptance that some relationships don't return to what they were and some people have to rebuild themselves without applause. When I walked back to Lydia, she was resting her hand on her belly with the peaceful kind of smile that comes from surviving something heavy and choosing not to let it define you. And in that moment, I realized the ending I needed wasn't Chloe's downfall, it was our freedom. Freedom from a family that demanded silence. Freedom from a sister who believed her actions lived in a vacuum. Freedom to protect our child without compromise. In the end, justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like distance. It looked like accountability. It looked like letting Chloe face the mirror she'd avoided her entire life. And sometimes the most satisfying ending isn't watching someone fall, it's watching them finally stand on ground they can no longer pretend isn't real.